looking, and we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to 99 Grit, guys. Well, it's 99 Grit Academy, I guess. Welcome to the Design Almanac. It's our Facebook Live event. It takes time at 10 a.m. CET every Monday. And we're going to be kind of changing that a little bit to some extent, just to see, what's happening and kind of figuring out what you think about those streams, and what kind of value we can bring, and whatever you want us to deliver. So we kind of changed the whole Amazon.com redesign schedule because we've heard a lot of comments and a lot of interesting remarks on some of the Facebook groups that we're on about people not really kind of getting a full grasp on what UX is and what it isn't, and how UX versus UI works, etc. And therefore, I just wanted to, put something together. It's something we've decided like last night, so just bear with me. This is pretty, a pretty rough prototype of what we could be actually delivering, but I just want to kind of test it out and see what's what. So before we get into this whole website madness and what UX, UI is, etc., I just want to break down some of those elements and tell you a little bit more about how I approach UX, what it is to me, what kind of elements it is built of, and how it all corresponds with UI. I've seen a lot of questions, so let me just take a sip of water. And let's do this. All right, let's do this. So I hope that you can see the screen. At least that's what my feed is telling me. So let's just break it down. So what I wanted to start off with is that there's one simple fact, that the interfaces or experiences related to those interfaces are pretty much everywhere around us now. And if you walk around your house like I did a few years back, and these are photographs like from a few years back, I've taken some of the photographs of the interfaces that I'm surrounded with on a daily basis, and attached to those interfaces are specific experiences, and I'm sure that you can relate when it comes to using our any kitchen appliance. They've got an interface of actually interacting with it. So there's like an Amica stove, with that fancy interface over there. Then we have some of the interfaces, like 4 or 5 buttons that are for me to actually interact with. With something close to the stove. I think that it's kind of this little outlet for the fumes coming out from your kitchen, and this is an example of those 5 buttons. So that's something that we're kind of accustomed to use on a daily basis. Here's another one. This is a washing machine, right? And there's an interface. There's a lot of information, and there's a specific experience that you get when you're actually kind of using that interface, right? I'm not even talking about kind of cooking or washing your dirty clothes, but there's an interface experience that somebody sat down, redesigned, and kind of put all these, all of that information in front of our eyes, so we can actually relate and kind of correspond with it a little bit more. So that's another one. I'm sure that there's a few other examples here. There's the remote control for our TV, and yeah, again, it's an interface of our interaction between a TV and ourselves. So that's what I'm kind of getting into, that there's an overwhelming amount of those interfaces around us, and we probably don't even notice them anymore, when it comes to kind of using them. But when you get a new TV, for example, with a new remote control, I'm sure that it takes you a little bit of, a moment at least, to actually figure out how it works. Every meeting room I go to, when I need to kind of use the projector, the projector is kind of, on the ceiling usually, and I need to operate the projector itself with a remote. And that definitely, adds a lot of difficulty to the, to a new user. There's a stressful environment involved. I've got a meeting, there's a big boss coming in, I need to pitch some of the design work. And and I've got this bloody projector to worry about. So that's definitely something stressful. And if the remote control for that projector itself is not usable, the experience of using it is pretty dreadful, specifically when it's a stressful environment like that. So that's definitely something I would encourage you guys to actually, have a look at, and kind of look around your immediate surroundings, and see how many interfaces we're actually having to kind of cope with on a daily basis. This is another one. This is kind of the intercom for how to let people into the building when you're actually in a flat of kind of a block of flats environment. So that's another interface to cover, with your mind. And specific experience is pretty poor, actually, kind of connected to this specific device. And then we have, everything related to the temperature in the house. That's another interface. A few buttons, some sort of a round circle element that allows you to adjust some of the features and some of the settings. And again, it's another interface that we need to deal with. And these are obviously physical interfaces, but these are real experiences. And when you look at UX design as a field, or experience design as a field, these elements, to me, it's pretty irrelevant now, what kind of interaction that is. It's the experience that matters. How we actually interact with that specific device in the context that we're in. I've mentioned that, the stressful environment of me doing a design pitch, or being part of a design project, and then sitting in front of a CEO, with some of the designs being shown. I need to work with this projector, and it doesn't seem to work. So that context of experience and kind of using it all together is definitely something that matters in when we design those kind of interfaces. So we need to not only understand the structure of the interface, but we need to understand the entire context of that experience and the entire context of that person trying to use that remote control when they are in a stressful environment. It should be just 3 buttons: on, source, and kind of automatic source, and switch off, and that's it, right? So it should be pretty easy, because of the context of use for that stressful environment, which it obviously is not. So there's a lot of examples. If you just look around your immediate surroundings, I'm sure you'll be able to find quite a few of those interfaces around you. So that's that. And then moving on to the next one, and what I wanted to kind of show you out, show you so you can check it out also, is what about the online experiences and how they differ from whatever's surrounding us currently. And as it turns out, some of these designs are like 4 or 5 years old, but not very much. This is a kind of an adjustment kind of circle that somebody designed. It's almost 3D looking at this thing, and it's obviously using what we've already learned in our immediate surroundings. So, from our dishwasher usage and our washing machine usage and our kitchen usage and all the other appliances we got to know within our lifespan. And some people basically, use that knowledge that everybody already has and then designs interface elements that kind of correspond to those elements. Because I'm looking at it, it's a little bit of a 3D element, but there's a lot of similarities to whatever's around me. So therefore, I can easily understand how it actually works. And that's what this whole user experience, UI design is all about. So that we can present something to the user, to a person that wants to use and interact with our software, and make it as usable and as obvious to use as possible. So that's why someone in this specific design decided to, use that association, with a real physical element. And it just goes on and on. Some switches that you can see here that are pretty much the same. Same goes for this one. It's really similar to the knob that you turn on the washing machine. Same goes for this one, on and off switches. We can find these switches everywhere around our houses, for switching on and off lights. It's a simple switch on and off. But somebody decided to move it to the sphere of the internet. And as I say, these designs are a few years old, so just bear with me. Because, these are pretty oldish, but they do represent this whole theme of being a human and trying to figure out a way around and an online or a digitized flat surface that has some elements to click on it, right? Or, you're looking at the screen using the mouse and the keyboard. We need to make sure that we can actually figure out how to use it. And using these kind of associations is definitely something helpful. We'll get into kind of what UX is in a second. I just wanted to kind of show you then the broader context of what this whole thing is all about. So that's that. Then moving on, another element, and then I've done some research. Like recently, I went into Pinterest and kind of looked at some of the design work. Beautiful designs, but again, it's built around the same concept, of fiddly little, switches and buttons and interface elements that we're all used to by now, from our dishwashers all the way to the online experiences. And because that uh, that association exists, it's so much easier for us to now to design any elements. But when you, for example, want to design something for someone that is not very online present, like a senior maybe, or a person that doesn't use internet for that, or hasn't been using internet for that long, or the browser windows, they might have a little bit of a difficulty to understand what you actually want them to do with this whole layout. And therefore, using kind of elements that they can relate to, understand the context, is definitely something relevant and important for us to comprehend as designers. So that's that. I'll be staring at the chat, and if you have any questions when I'm actually doing the rant, definitely fire away, and I'll be happy to help out. So that's that. It's pretty much the same thing all over. We've got the switches; they're a little bit 3D, so they kind of assume that that you can actually turn those around physically, and therefore they're pretty easy for the user to understand. Same goes for this one. There's this new theme in UI design now, which is called Neumorphism, and it's kind of this is very recent. This is like 2020 stuff, and if you look at it, it really resembles what I've been talking about so far out of the interface designs or the components or little buttons and switches that I've shown you so far. And these were designs from like 5 or 6 years ago, and now we're getting back to neomorphism, which is pretty much using that 3D space in accordance with those kind of elements that I've just described. So that's something very relevant, and that's definitely something you can leverage your skills against, and then try to kind of come up with these kind of designs so that people looking at it, they know that it's clickable because it's kind of 3D. It's kind of interactive in that way when you just look at it, right? So that's kind of it. Always kind of we come full circle every now and then. So we go from really detailed, almost 3D looking kind of buttons and elements on the interface to a massive flat UI, like no borders, no shadows, no gradients, nothing, all the way full circle to neomorphism, which is again shadows and inner shadows and drop shadows and all of that, and gradients again, just to make it more natural for people to actually use and kind of comprehend. So I'm sure that in another like 2 or 3 years, we'll be mixing those again, and there'll be more of a flat UI element coming back, and minimalism and all of those. So yeah, it's exciting because it's changing constantly, and it kind of seeing it over time how it evolves from one into the other. It's pretty exciting to look at. So right. So this is kind of, I think that I have maybe one or two more examples when it comes to kind of recent designs that still follow the same concept, right? So again, neomorphism, 3D shadows. I know that how those elements interact just looking at them. I don't even need to kind of click around for me to understand how they all kind of operate and what it's all about, right? So that's pretty much it. So that's the entire context for me when it comes to UX or experience design or UI or interface design, because these interfaces of our interaction in between any machine, any device, whatever that device is it a software that has been designed by someone online for my banking, or is it something I click around on a daily basis, like a keyboard? It's all relevant because when it comes to designing those experiences, it's all down to that interaction and how we design that interaction so that when we look at whatever we're looking at, it's understandable to us. We know how to, or we assume that we know how to use it, and we start using it, and the experience of using it is just silky smooth, and it just works great, and it's a fantastic experience. And that's what we want as UX designers to get to. And there are specific elements that we need to tackle to actually get there. And this is the specific difference between the UX and the UI. When it comes to UI, I'm sure that the abbreviation, what that is. It's user interface design, right? So UI design is user interface design, and UX design is user experience design. So these are not vastly different, but I think that they form integral parts of each other. So I think that UI is within UX, not the other way around, right? And I will show you how I understand what UX is and what kind of elements it breaks down into. And I'll show you examples of those kind of elements and how they're structured and used by UX designers to actually make that thing, yeah, work. So let me just take another sip of water here. And again, any questions, fire away in the chat. I'm using a different software today, so hopefully, I can actually see whatever's happening. But yeah, moving on. So when it comes to UX design, I'm sure that you've seen, if you Google searched UX design or UI design or experience design for that matter, there's a lot of different models of explaining what that actually is. Functionality, look and feel, business case. We have technology, people, business, design. We have, we have interaction design. We have human factors and ergonomics, etc. And they're all right. But when you're actually getting into this field, this is not something that you really need to worry about. I think that this is closer to an academic discussion about what fits into this circle and what doesn't. I think that everything that you need to remember is that when you do get into this field, I try to avoid these kind of theoretical discussions because it doesn't really matter to me. What fits into these circles, because this is not a very helpful discussion to me. What is a helpful discussion if I can actually break things down and say that this is built off these 5 elements and this is the structure, and then add stuff on top of that. And some of these designs over here, these infographics, actually do that. And they're pretty useful in that way. But to start with, I would just use a simple kind of a bullet list of elements, what I think UX design actually is built off. And what kind of elements or areas should we really be considering when we look at UX design as a whole. And the first one is the technology. So I'll get into each one of those so you'll be able to fully comprehend what I actually mean by, what UX actually is. So technology is everywhere around us now. We're kind of we're being born now with internet around us, so it's crazy. I'm a dinosaur. I still remember the times where when you didn't have internet access, available to you apart from a dial-up. I actually remember this how you didn't have internet at all, and then in the 90s, it all dawned on us that you can actually do a dial-up, and these crazy sounds came out of your computer, and you connected to this thing called the internet, with a few www pages only. And but now it's like water, it's like electricity, it's like it's like air. It needs to be there. It's one of the kind of foundation services that are being provided to us as people now. And without it, we feel lost big time. So therefore, the technology and internet and access to it and all the limitations and constraints that come with it is something that a UX designer needs to consider. And I'll get into some of the details, because everything related to, the hardware we're using, the software we're using, the technological aspects of how that constrains us as designers is something we should be really looking at. And I'll get into some detail about that. Then we have the information architecture. So how do we organize the information around it or within our design? Then how we design that information specifically. Then how do we provide the interaction with that information? Then how we test it with the users. And then how do we beautifully represent it with a beautiful UI? And then a little bit about copywriting. So that's kind of the structure of what we want to be talking about today. And yeah, let's just keep on going. I'll just check let me just change the screen to our default scene, and let me just see if everything is up and running. Just bear with me, guys. Just bear with me. Just bear with me. There you go. So that's 99 grid. So this live is actually on 99 grid as we've outlined it. So yeah, so that's that. Everything is cool. I'm just double checking because we're using eCam for the first time, and I just want to make sure that everything is, working, and that we're all kind of live where we need to be live. So that's that. Again, if you're watching this on 99 grid page, definitely use the Zoom link so you can actually jump on the Zoom call with me, and you'll be able to see whatever I'm doing, and also ask some questions. Obviously, you can ask those questions in the comments as well. So that's that. All right, let's just break this down. I can close this thing and go back to our story. And yeah, so this is the entire breakdown. And now let's break down each one of those elements. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I just want you to understand what UX design is built off and what kind of areas we should be looking at as designers. So technology is the first element. And to me, the main aspect of this whole thing, without getting into the details of what the technological stack underneath is, although it is constraining to an extent. To me, the first thing as a junior UX designer, something that I learned too late, I believe, is the screen resolution of the hardware and the devices we are designing for. So that's the first thing that I would put out there, and that's a very simple way to actually check it. If you go to gs.statcounter.com, there's a screen resolution stats tab there, and you can actually see for the last year, how did the resolution kind of percentages changed on different devices. This is like worldwide. So as you can see, I think that this one is that's what is this? This is all platforms. Let's do all platforms, or maybe we can actually check not all platforms. We'll check desktop and mobile just to see where we are. So this displays all of the resolutions that are being used worldwide. You can obviously kind of list not the worldwide. Let's see, maybe Europe. If you're just working on a European piece of software, you can just check Europe, and then you can also filter out, if you want to see all the platforms being used, or do you want to just use and see the desktop ones, tablet, or mobile. So these are the three dominant, obviously, spaces and hardware devices that are being used for, the displaying of elements. Let me just share the screen. Apologies. So, so this is kind of the way that we describe these things, and we can design interfaces for the desktop. We can design interfaces for the tablets and for the mobile devices as well. And obviously, when you get into this field, early on, you should also remember that there's something called responsive web design, when one design should cover all of those three platforms, because it's all about the user at the end of the day. And we know that people use our software on their phone, and then they continue on their tablet, sitting on the couch. And yeah, sometimes they use it at work on the computer. So we need to make sure that wherever platform they try to interact with our solution, it's pretty much platform agnostic. So yeah, we need to make sure that it works and looks beautiful and kind of acts the same or a similar way when the person uses it on the mobile device, whereas when they're using it on the desktop device. And for us to do that, when we are designing something, we want to make sure that we fully understand what kind of resolution that device is using mainly. So if we go to and filter out just the desktop elements, as you see here, there you go. So we have the desktop screen resolution stats for Europe for the last year. So from March 2019 to March 2020. And as you can see, for desktop screen resolutions in Europe, it's full HD, so it's 1920 by 1080, 23%. And the second one, that's 1366 by 768. So these are the two main, the dominant resolutions. And this is a good starting point for any design to actually start out with. So we go either with a full HD or the 1366 by 768 because they cover the large span of the devices being used currently. And this doesn't change very often, so I would just recommend just having a look every now and then to see if anything's changed, but I wouldn't assume anything hardware-wise will change that much and that soon and that fast for us to actually consider it like every day. But this is a cool way to actually check what kind of resolutions we should be designing for. So that's for the desktops, for example. And if you want to see mobile devices, you can have the same thing. Obviously, as you can see, it is falling, but it's still a dominant resolution is 360 by 640, and that's the dominant resolution we'd be designing for. Again, because what we want to do when we do design interfaces or experiences on a digital platform like a computer, we want to make sure that we kind of cover the broadest possible field of resolutions, unless we're working for a service provider, or maybe for a business or a service provider that has a very niche user group, a very expert field, and they are kind of bound to one platform, or they're bound to one. They're only on Windows, for example, machines, or they're. I remember there was this one design that I was responsible for doing, years ago, and that was for an interface being displayed on these little Motorola devices that people use in the warehouses. So they have, you know, hundreds and hundreds of different packages, like in a post office or Amazon, and the person working in the warehouse, they need to just check the packages before they actually give them out to the person for delivery, and they're using this little interface. It was like, I think, 240 by 320, and it can only display two fonts and only 16 colors. So it was pretty limiting, but and it was also running, I think it was Windows 9.5 or something like that. It was like a strange mobile Windows software or a platform that we need to design for. And yeah, that's what we needed to do to work with. And for us, understanding it very early on was really important. So that's something I would definitely recommend that you actually, yeah, comprehend at the very beginning. And that's one of the hardware technological aspects of the UX design role, to fully understand the constraints, the creative constraints that we have to deal with when we're designing something for, a piece of hardware, for example. So the resolution is very physical. And then obviously there's a lot of things related to technology. Are we designing for, frameworks like Bootstrap, or frameworks like, I don't know, AngularJS, and, and whatever that builds for us as a constraint, or even a potential, not a constraint, actually a flexibility, or an additional flexibility for that matter. So there's a lot of guidelines, obviously, as well. If you're designing a mobile app for Android, or if you're designing a mobile app for iOS, there are some constraints there as well to understand. But these are all the technological aspects. For me, iOS is a technological constraint, or an Android device is a technological constraint, because it's got a list of resolutions, it's got a list of requirements that you need to follow to get through the certification process, etc. So these are all the elements that you should be considering to start with when it comes to technological aspects of a UX design. So that's something we need to be aware of. But if you're just getting into this whole thing, don't get too bogged down or too scared or frustrated with it. Just remember that there's something like a resolution of the screen, and that people work, on your whatever you're designing on a phone and on a desktop computer from time to time. Just to make sure that you design something that fits those two platforms, and they can actually kind of switch around in between those. So that's something I would put into the first aspect of the technology. So if there are any questions, definitely fire away in the comments. And also, if you're watching this, remotely, or if you're watching this not live, definitely let us know about your comments and about your questions additionally, because we're going to be doing that, every week now. I'm just going to take a sip of water. There's quite a lot of talking here, guys. So that's that. So let's move back to the next element, and that would be, as you probably remember, and obviously I'm kind of showcasing what I mean by the technological aspects of the device. So we have the phone, we have the interface of the desktop, and we have the interface of the tablet. I need to kind of create a design that works for each one of those. Then we go into information architecture, and that's the second a second element when it comes to UX design, and that's what, for example, UI designer doesn't really get as much contact with, and that's very much something that a UX designer deals with on a daily basis, whereas UI designer, he kind of gets the stuff from a UX designer, I would say, or structured in a proper way. So when it comes to information architecture, I want to show you Amazon and eBay to kind of showcase what I mean by information architecture. Do we have an example here? Yeah, we do have an example here. But before we get into that example, information architecture is kind of is us as designers playing the role of a librarian. So imagine that you have 1,000 books. There's a way to organize that information, right? I mean, if it wasn't, the librarians would have no work. So if you have 1,000 books on the shelves, you need to structure that information about those books in a certain way so that you can actually find the book that you're looking for. So if you're looking for a specific book, there's a way for you to find it, right? And that's the entire kind of gist of information architecture. How to organize the information, whatever that information is, so that the person that wants to access that information understands the structure, right? So that it's kind of ergonomic for them, so that it's understandable, usable. And all of those elements kind of are very closely connected to the information architecture. So going back to the book example, if we use that one, you can organize those books and put them in an alphabetical order from A to Z, for example, right? So that's the sorting of that information. So it goes alphabetical from A to Z. And now the structure of that sort would be, we can do that by the title of the book, for example, right? So it goes from A to Z using the title of the book. It goes from A to Z using the author's surname, for example. We can, kind of group that information or categorize that information into the types of books. We've got some horrors, so dramas, some science fiction, some fantasy books. So we can organize that by the genre of that specific book, right? And that also creates a structure of information so then we can easily find what we're looking for, right? So that's another one. Then we can go with, for example, something that I've used, and that's the color of the wrap, or color of the of the outside of the book, whatever that is. Because for me it was easier to find, because I was always like, where is this blue book, And I had just a shelf called blue books, and all of the blue books that have a blue cover would be sitting right there, and it was a lot easier for me to find, because I'm a more of a visual person probably, and my memory is more visual, and therefore it was a lot easier for me to find a blue book on a blue shelf. And then obviously I've used additional categorization techniques, like it was sorted from the biggest to the smallest, or by the author, or by the year of the release, etc., etc. So as you can see, 1,000 books can be structured as information in very, in a lot of different ways. And information architecture is a key aspect of this whole thing, of how do we actually come up with an understandable and very usable information architecture, so that people going into our solution actually understand where to find something. So I'm going to use Amazon and eBay as a showcase after I've taken a sip of water. So let me just do that. I've got Amazon opened up, and I've got eBay opened up as well. If you look at both of those, they don't really differ that much from the perspective of the first look and feel. But I don't want to kind of go into the UI or the way that the interface looks yet. I just want to kind of make sure that you focus on one element, and that's the information architecture, and how the kind of elements of the structure of the information on Amazon and eBay has been structured for the users to use. So underneath this little menu, we have an entire list of categories. So that's what we deal with when we are creating an information architecture. So we want to create a list of categories for that information, so that when people actually search for anything on our page, they understand, or they can assume what's going to be inside of that specific element. And I wanted to kind of give you one example, and that would be a watch. So a watch is a good example, because to me it fits into two categories. And let's see how Amazon and eBay actually tackle that element, because a watch is something you wear. A watch is an electronical piece very often, specifically with the smartwatches of today, and they are a fashion element as well. So it's something you wear. It's a fashion element. So it describes kind of, and it fits or not kind of to your clothing, and also it's an electronic device. And it also can kind of be a pretty advanced electronic device. It can have all sorts of different gadgets like GPS and 3D connectivity, etc. So therefore, if you're looking for a watch of a specific sort, where would you look for that? At Amazon.com. And that's something that they needed to come up with. Where do we put the watch in? And let's see. So we have We have the electronics, for example. Where is that? It's probably somewhere here. There's women's fashion, there's men's fashion, and we have electronics. So maybe electronics, right? So we can go to electronics and see, and there's wearable technology. So maybe that's somewhere where I would find. Obviously, I need to type in a search field of some sort. So let's just go something in the search field. And there you go. So this is the way to find Apple Watch Series 5, whatever, on Amazon.com. So it sits within the wearable technology. But if I was looking for a different watch, I can clean that one up. It will probably be sitting in men's fashion, right? And that's, yeah, as you can see, that's watches right there. So I think that, yeah, and let's try and type in Apple as well. Right? So again, I can find this watch band. So I can still kind of have some elements that are related to fashion and kind of correspond with Apple smartwatch. So same goes for this one and this one, etc., etc. So this is the work of a UX designer to come up with an information architecture so that me being a user searching or trying to find specific amount of information or specific information within a system, it's understandable for me to do it, and it's pretty easy for me to find, and it's kind of, yeah, it's something that I can intuitively look for and find. So that's that. And now let's see how eBay kind of did it when it comes to watches. The difference with eBay is, they've got these semi-categories displayed also here, whereas on Amazon, I don't think they're there. It's like, yeah, we've got more like today's deals, customer service, etc. So Amazon, for some reason, known to them, obviously, and they have got some, I'm sure, results that kind of enforce that reason, have decided not to put that category over here, probably because they want you to just type in whatever you're looking for in the search field. And they've got all the categories over here, so they're like hidden away. So they seem like a secondary feature to me. Whereas on eBay, it seems more like it's a primary feature. I can still search for it, and I think it's black bold border around it, so I can actually see it. But the categories are displayed here, and they actually kind of drop down this massive mega menu with all the elements. So let's see fashion and see if we can find the watches over here. It says, yep, we've got watches and luxury watches. And then if we go to electronics, we have smart home, we have smart watches. So it's not wearable technology, it's smart watches. So that's another thing that I wanted to highlight when it comes to information architecture. It's not just the structure of the information, but it's also the category names and how we name things. And there are specific ways of doing that. There's a method called card sorting that adds a lot of value to a UX designer when we are trying to come up with an understandable kind of structure information for the user that we're designing things for. And we will cover the card sorting exercise within these lives, probably a few weeks from now. Unless you don't want us to kind of continue, but I hope that you do. And we will cover that in detail as well. So you can actually get some benefit and get a practice, a kind of exercise of how to build information architecture from that perspective. But so the structure of the information when it comes to the categories and how to put them together so that users can find stuff is one thing. And then when it comes to, again, information architecture, it's not just that. Once they have found something, so let's maybe go to one of these watches here on eBay. This is also information architecture. So the way that this entire interface is structured, it's not just about finding stuff for information architecture. It's also about how do you prioritize the information? How do we, put the categories together? There's this massive banner first. Then we have some shop luxury brands. So we have like brands first, then fashion brands, then featured events, then we have featured luxury events, etc. So then we have another component that displays the authenticated luxury watches, etc. So, and then limited time deals, etc. And we just scroll down and just go crazy with it. But this is also how we organize the information on the interface. It's got nothing to do with what this font typeface is, what the color is. It's got nothing to do with that. What we want to make sure is that we start with the most relevant to the most important thing at the very beginning for the user. and then just scrolling through, making sure that the information is relevant, that it's available to the user at this level, not somewhere level down, etc., etc. So information architecture is a key element of a UX designer's role and work on a daily basis. And I would say that these two elements, for anybody getting into this field, are the things to understand. So the first one is how to organize the information from the perspective of categorizing, grouping it together so that it's understandable and you can find stuff in it. And then once you have found something, we present the information so that it's also, again, structured. Most important, less important, all the way to the least important information at the very, very bottom, which is usually the footer of the, yeah, as you can see over here, the footer of the web page itself. So that's where you probably find your contact information, something that you very rarely use. So that's that. So there's always a reason for these, headers, footers, these categories on the left, and that's a role of a UX designer to actually figure out what's important and what isn't. So that's the information architecture. So going back to our little slides, and I'm going to go with another sip. All right, we can go further down. So we've covered technology, and we now know what information architecture is all about. So we've got a set of information, and we organize it. And this is one of the examples. It's called, the guy that did it, his name is Saul Wurman, who's like the godfather of information architecture. And I just wanted to show you and showcase what he did when he was the kind of, this is a design of a subway in Tokyo, I believe. And yeah, this is how to structure the information so that it's easier for someone to actually comprehend all of those stations. Obviously, there's a lot of UI or visual design associated with it as well, kind of the yin-yang symbol, kind of adjacent to Japan and the harmony and all of that. And that's obviously some sort of an inspiration, but at the end of the day, it's a list of subway stations and, showcased in a small format. I believe it was printed off in a square format for people to actually take with them and kind of understand where the hell they are. So this is kind of the gist of information architecture, how to organize it so that it's nice to, so it's easy for us to actually find our way around where we are, etc. So that's one of the examples I would say. Not digital one, obviously. So once we have structured the information properly, we can then go into the next stage, to me, and that's information design. And to me, once we have the information structured properly, this is the moment when we start to come up with different ways of actually designing that information. This is not UI. This is not about creating icons and colors and brand. It's not about that. It's about what is the best way to present that information so that it provides the right information to the user, right? And I think that the inspiration that I've used is the Formula One. Apologies from the pixelated, it's straight from the TV. So apologies from the pixelation of this this view. But what I wanted for you to kind of look at is the stuff on the right hand side, the bottom right hand side of whatever we're looking at here. And this is like Bottas versus Hamilton. The war of those demons was great to watch. I'm a Formula One. I wouldn't say nutcase, but I really enjoy watching it from time to time. Not recently, but in the past I used to. So Bottas versus Hamilton. So we see those two drivers, and then this information that has been provided to us here is vastly different from the information provided at the very bottom, right? So it's not just a label and value. So this is like Hockenberg and 59 seconds 0.282. This is very simple. So there's number and the racer's name and then the time difference. This is vastly different. We still have the structure of the number of that driver and his surname, but then this is vastly different. They could pretty much display it differently, right? They could say throttle level, 5, brake level 0, speed 245, current gear 6, and then DRS off, right? But they've decided to present that information differently. Not from the perspective of the, how beautiful or not beautiful it is, but from the perspective of information design, to make it the easiest possible way to comprehend that information. there's another example here. So we have the differences, same to drivers, we have the differences in times over spread over 4 laps, right? So this is a pretty, I would say, poor interpretation of that information, because it just gives us the only thing, the color. So we can see Bottas here and his times on lap 53, 54, 5, and 6. And we can see Hamilton with the differences. So we see that he is gaining like 2 something seconds a lap on Bottas. But this is hardly, a visual representation. It's just adding one glimpse of color to this whole thing. So for a user to comprehend what the difference in between those two drivers is, which is the key element, right? We want to see how much Hamilton is gaining on Bottas in real time. And this is telling us to an extent, but it's hard for us to kind of interpret that. So therefore, this visualization is far better for me. So this is the same information, right? We can see, well, this is in between Ricardo and Rosberg with this specific example, but it shows the same thing. So it shows the laps. So over the last 3 laps, how did the gap change, right? So the gap was 17 seconds, and now it's like, well, it was 22. Now it's 17 seconds. And you can see, and the DRS is open or not, so you can see those additional elements there as well. So this is the core of information design. It's not for us to come up, should this be red, green, blue, yellow? Should this have this little kink at the very end? What kind of colors we're going to be using? It's not about that, and how visually pleasing it's going to be. It's more about the functionality of that information, because this to me is data. And this to me is information. So we've derived the information from the data and we've presented it in a proper way to the user, right? So that's what a UX designer's role is also, to not only structure the information so that we know what we're talking about and, kind of it's usable for the user. It's also something that we want to put in front of them so that they actually understand what they're looking at a first glance, right? And that's where information design kind of kicks in. So that's what I wanted to kind of showcase from the world of Formula One as an example. But if we just go to Pinterest.com, which is one of my favorite places to go for inspiration, and if we just type in dashboard design, you'll be able to see what I mean when it comes to UX design and kind of designing interfaces and experiences online for some of the software. Any dashboard you click does exactly that. So it takes pretty much a database of information, structures it properly so you can see the navigation and kind of the categories of information that the user can actually navigate through, which is part of the information architecture. So the navigation between the entire system is kind of built that way, right? But when he actually finds what he's looking for, or she finds what she's looking for, we display the information in a proper manner. So we display some graphical aspects of a graph describing something over time, like here, like earning statistics, for example. We see how that changes over time. We see the total sales structured and presented in a different way. We see some bar charts in between sales and earnings, so additional information presented in a different way. And that, again, is the role of a UX designer, to come up with what is the best way to actually showcase that information to the user out of the data that we have. So information design to me is kind of how do we move from raw data into information, right? So once we've structured the information properly, how do we design it so that it's the most useful aspect of this whole thing, right? So that's information design. Then we go into interaction design. I'm going to show you the kind of showcase you. I'm going to showcase Amazon.com for that specific reason, because apologies, just a sip of water. I should get some vodka next time. I'll be a lot better. But I don't drink. When it comes to interaction design, there's a few elements we should be really looking at, and that's I'll showcase each one of those on Amazon.com. But for you to see that each one of those elements has a specific structure to it, and when you are a UX designer and you want to design something, interaction design is one of the key elements. But you need the previous few elements also. So just to recap, we know what the constraints of the technology are. These are creative constraints nonetheless. The resolution is the hardware and the software, etc. Boom, we've got that. Then we have a set of information, and through information architecture, we've organized it properly. Then we've presented it properly to the user, right? So we've designed it beautifully so that it's actually, a bar chart, a graph, some written text form, etc., so that the person looking at that information that was already structured and kind of organized properly, they already know what the hell we're on about, right? So they can look at it and like, okay, I understand. That's great, right? So that's that. But then there is no interactivity yet. So we want to make sure that that information is actually interactive to the user, so they can actually do something with it, right? They can click around, etc. And there are, as you can see, 5 elements that interaction design is built around. And I don't want to bore you too much with it. We will get into interaction design in the future live events, where we're going to get into actual practical application of interface design or UX design itself, because I want to kind of keep it out as an open classroom. And what I want to do is, within the next 8 to 10, maybe 12 weeks, cover the entire UX design course with you guys, and and just validate some of the concepts, kind of open up for discussions, etc. So every week, probably, if you're up for it, just let us know. Maybe we could stretch it and do like twice a week or something, to add more value, and showcase some of some of the information, in more detail, etc. So definitely let us know about that. So going back to interaction design, visibility is the first element of this whole thing. So the element that we want the user to interact with needs to be visible. It needs to be on the actual interface, right? That's one thing. And again, even if it is on the user interface, it needs to be visible. It needs to be, a dominant color. It needs to be something that allows the user, the person looking at your interface, to actually see it and notice it. Oh, there's an element there. So that's visibility. Then visibility is the first thing, so they need to see it. The second one is perceivability. So how perceivable is the interactivity of that element? So that's the logo on each, the logo type on each web page. It's on the top left corner, and usually it should lead to the main page, to the starting page, the landing page of the entire system, right? And that's the perceivability. That's something we've learned over our usage of so many different interface elements in our past. And therefore, that perceivability aspect is something we should use as interaction designers or UX designers providing interaction design, to make sure that those elements are perceivable by the user as interactive. And when they do interact with it, they actually find that interactivity to be, something that they were hoping to be, right? So it's like they've perceived that to do something, and it does that. And that's okay. That's pretty easy to comprehend. That's what I was expecting as a user, and that's perfect. Another element is, once it's visible and it works in a perceivable way, that's feedback. And that's, again, very close to the working of this whole thing. So we need to provide proper feedback. So I click something, something happens. I click on a button, it changes its color. I click on a button, and it moves me to the next screen. I click on something, and something happens. The interaction happens. There's so many systems that we've designed in the past. When we got into this whole thing, to a design project, we would see that, for example, you click on the next button in an e-commerce site, and you're like clicking on the next, but nothing happens. And then what actually happened was something that was outside of the viewport. So you click next, and there's an information that you've made a mistake or a spelling mistake or something within your form that's very long, so it's outside of your viewport. It's outside of your viewport, so you don't see the error message, and therefore that's pretty bad, because the feedback is not there. We don't see the feedback, and therefore we would need to obviously scroll once I click next, I would scroll the user to that specific error message so that they see it, and that's feedback itself. Then once we have provided the first 3, so we have visible elements, they work and act in a perceivable way, they give us proper feedback. That's very easy for the user to learn, and we want to create as many of those kind of learning tracks for the user as possible, but not too many. We don't want to overwhelm the user with 25 different ways of interacting with a button, because it's going to be too difficult to learn. Because I click it once, then it takes me to the next page. I click it the other way, in a separate place or location in the system, and it does something else. And we want to, limit that to an extent that's learnable by a human being. So the learnability aspect of this whole thing is very crucial as well. And then once we've committed to those 4, all we need to do is maintain consistency. So when a button does something, make sure that it does that every time, right? So make sure that you are consistent with the approach. And that's the entire interaction design. We will get into, the details of those, but I don't want to go into too much of that right now. So I'm going to go to Amazon and showcase maybe one of their interfaces. So when it comes to interaction design, it's kind of everything related to your interaction on the interface. So these hover elements, I hover over something, and these sellers, it kind of highlights. I hover on top of any one of those, and the color name, so this one changes obviously, and the photograph itself, and then I move on to the photograph, and there's a pop-up detail of the photograph. So there's a lot of functionality and kind of interactivity to this one product page. If I hover over those elements, they change the gallery view of that specific element, right? And I'm just hovering, not even clicking yet, right? So I'm just hovering on top of these things, and that's when things already start happening. So it's very interactive, right? And then when I click on something, that's when, something happens. So customers who bought changed, the name changed, so it's Glacier White now. The photographs, the gallery changed. So I clicked on an element, and then something happened. So the feedback works pretty well. So that's that, right? So the elements that are interactive to me, these are these blue links. So they're pretty visible. So the visibility aspect works. Some of those, I might say that probably because they're less important, they can be a little bit smaller, like these maybe share icons over here, or the delivered to Poland or something. Some of these elements are less visible, but that's a conscious choice, and that's good. So not everything that's interactive needs to be visible, in front of your eyes. So that's that, right? So the visibility, the perceivability. So if I see this button add to cart, I perceive that when I do this, it's going to add to the shopping cart. There's even a little tooltip that actually showcases and enforces, yes, it's going to add to the shopping cart. So when I do that, a feedback happens. I've got that in the cart, and I can, popular movies, and I can actually do some additional interactions, right? And again, I hover over some elements, and additional interaction happens with some additional functionality. So the visibility, perceivability, so I was expecting that it's going to add it to cart, so that's what it did. Then the kind of the learnability aspect of this whole thing, the feedback, it's all there pretty much, right? So it's pretty solid. I could probably, if I go and I really want to kind of find something on Amazon that's, that's maybe something, I would really have to try and search a little bit harder, I guess, to find something that might not work. For example, let's see if I can find something. There's a button here, with a drop down, and there's a button here without the drop down, but there is this little arrow that actually represents the drop down, so I would give them that. So yeah, it just seems like it's working, So wherever we go, we have the similar, consistent elements, and like it or not, it actually works. So so that's pretty much the gist of this whole thing. Click here, etc., etc. So that's pretty much it when it comes to interaction design and how Amazon treated that specific aspect, right? So that's that. Then we go into the next one, and that's usability testing. And when it comes to the design itself, once we've structured it properly, created a proper interaction design, and then kind of structured it together into a prototype of some sort, we can then move on to usability testing and kind of test it out with some real users. And I'm going to show you some, maybe like 2 examples. One of them is a commercial, and we're going to be using an eye tracker here. And that's the respondent on the left here. And we've got some attention.
Nice car.
Over here.
Thanks. It has green efficiency.
It's called blue efficiency, darling.
See the actual elements. These are called manipulations. There's some data being recorded here when it comes to the frustration and the excitement element. And when you actually review this, I think that the excitement happened when the woman showed up. So that little pink element actually started raising when the woman showed up, and the frustration or the meditation kind of was elevate a little bit when the actual thing showed up. It's beautiful face, the car itself. So that's that. And when it comes, why am I showing you this? To me, UX design and usability testing in its specificity, it's all about gathering data again. So we want to measure whatever we put in front of a person. So when they are being faced with a few challenges, we build a prototype. We give them a solid list of tasks for them to act upon within our prototype, and then we just let them do it. So this is called a research scenario. We'll get into that as well. Not today, obviously, but we will. So we build a research scenario, which is like a list of tasks that we want the user to actually do in an interface in our prototype. So we give them that, and then they just start clicking around. I have an example of something like that. So as you can see, there's a user that actually, clicks around a specific interface. And this is like years back. This is something, was an as-is a solution for one of the companies that we were kind of doing some research on. And yeah, it was about how to click around those elements. And, did we find anything interesting and any mistakes that the user did, etc. So we gave them a few tasks. They started clicking around, scrolling down, up and down, and kind of filling all of that stuff out. And we just wanted to see if it works. So that's pretty much when it comes to usability engineering. So we want to make sure that we know what we're testing. So we put the prototype together. We have a solid list of questions that we want to ask the user. We have a solid list of tasks that they should be kind of taking when they are using our prototype, and then we just let go and we start recording these things. And there's, I think, years back we've used a software called TechSmith Moray, where you would be able to, to basically gather all the clicks, all the scrolls, all of the data, but it was useful to an extent. Currently, we're basically using Camtasia, provided by TechSmith also, and we're not really bothered with how many clicks a person did or how many thousand pixels has the cursor kind of moved around the screen. We're interested in what the actual problems are. It's a qualitative study, so we kind of sit down with them. We want to kind of make sure that we're on the right track with our prototype, and we use something similar. So we do record their face, we do record the screen itself, just to have a validation of where they were searching for data, so we can actually put it together into a synthesis of a research report when we are done with usability testing as a whole. So that's as much as I would cover with usability testing for now, and that's a crucial part of UX design's role as well, user experience designer's role. Although I'm sure that you've probably heard, or even we're part of teams where UX researcher is actually a specific role that only deals with research, only deals with testing of software solutions or prototypes, and that person doesn't even design anything. They just test out, and they're very qualified and experienced in that specific field. And then you have UX designers and UX researchers, depending on the company you're in or want to be. With the larger projects, with more projects coming through the door, these kind of roles kind of are needed there. So it's, first of all, a benefit so that the designer doesn't test their own solutions, which is great to have. And second of all, we have enough of work to feed the beast, if you like. So depending on where you are, you can do both, I guess. You can actually specify or define these roles specifically, saying UX researchers are not designing, and UX designers are not researching, and they just work together very closely as part of one team. And that's a great thing to have. But also, don't feel too bad if you want to do the research yourself. Just try to keep an open mind to whatever the user is telling you, because there's always this buy-in effect. So I've designed something and it's my baby, and I give it away to somebody to click around, and he's just really challenging it, and I need to really try and get myself into this open head mindset, and avoid any help or support. So that, you can actually see there's a link over there, check it out, so that we get a proper test. So that's as far as the usability testing as I would go down within this live session. So that's that. And then we get into the UI design, and that's where we combine all of the previous steps together, and we start creating UI elements, or not really creating UI elements, kind of creating something that's visually more appealing, visually more pleasing to the user, or more finished as a product. So I'll go back to our good old Pinterest, and as you can see, when you type in UI design, there's quite a few elements here. So we have, like, the typography, the iconography, you've got some illustrations here, you've got the drop shadows, you've got, all the craziness with transparencies. You've got a lot of advanced visual tools at the UI designer's disposal to actually showcase some of the UX designers' elements in a proper way, right? So that it's beautiful, pleasing, interesting to the user. But the structure of the information stays, the information architecture stays, the interaction, that it's that element that's going to be clickable to the user, that it's always in this space, that it always leads to the next page, or that it always does this, or that always generates this drop-down menu. These are all the elements that the UX designers put out there, and they're valid, right? So we need to keep the information architecture intact. We need to make sure that the information design concept is being delivered by the UI designer properly. So is it a graph, a pie chart, whatever that information, or is it just a paragraph of text? Just to make sure that it's properly visible and usable to the user. So we need to make sure that information architecture, information design, interaction design, and all the elements related to things we've talked about are actually there. And then the UI designer has got an easier task also, because they now know the structure. All they need to do is kind of work a little bit with those aspects visually to create a beautiful, a desirable product. So that's a pretty cool kind of state to be in when it comes to UI design. You can use photography, or photos. And you've got all of these different tools at your disposal now, and that's a pretty exciting step to be in. But it requires quite a lot of thought and quite a lot of work to actually get there, right? To make that app, whatever you're designing, system, a desktop solution, desirable and usable to start with. So that's the intertwine of those two elements, right? So that's where we get into the UI once we've done the legwork as UX designers. So that's that. And then moving back to the next one, and that's the last one. So that's copywriting, and I'm going to show Amazon again. I'm not sure if it's going to be a good example or a bad one, but is it going to be here? Yeah, okay. So we can use that. When it comes to copywriting, there's quite a few elements. The way that people read through content online, it's like an F-shaped form. So we kind of read from the left to right. In this part of Europe, obviously, most of people in Europe kind of read left to right because of the alphabet, etc. And that's kind of, and when you do a kind of an eye tracker test on any kind of content, you can see that F pattern. So people read from left to right, and then they scroll down. They find something interesting, they again go from left to right. They scroll down, and they again go from left to right. And that's something that's pretty visible when you do an eye tracking test that you've seen already, right? But when it comes to copywriting, make sure that you have these kind of labels, so that people can notice and scroll through content pretty quickly, so that they have the right text on them, it's the right color, it's the right prominent element, so we can actually see it, that it's, we've looked at the watches, right? You've got the shop luxury brands. So I can scroll through and pretty easily kind of find those labels at the very top. And this is part of copywriting, to have the right label describing the right element and at the right location and in the right kind of interval of space, right? So that's one thing. Again, when it comes to, I'll go back to Amazon, and that's, have these kind of elements. But more specifically, when it comes to copywriting, to me, there's something called usable typography, and that's something like we see here. So fair enough, we have the product description, so you have the label. So I did stop. There's actually change in the background element as well. So there's a visual play here as well. But there's a problem here, because this is hardly usable typography. I mean, if we had a book that had paragraphs this long, it would be a really difficult task to read them, because our eye needs to go all the way along this line, and then once we get to the end of this line of text, we need to go back all the way to the left. And it's with 2 lines of text, that's pretty easy. But if you have more than that, your eye is going to get really tired really fast, because it needs to look for, okay, which line did I read, which line did I not read. So there are some rules to actually create a usable typography online, like 85 to 90 symbols, including spaces in one line of text. The line height of this whole thing should be 150% of the font size, etc. So there's a few elements to create meaningful and kind of usable typography. So that's the structural element, and then having the right information written there. So when you do have, let's just add something to cart, for example. Added to cart. So this is also kind of part of the copywriting, right? So we need to make sure that we communicate with the user in a proper way so that they can actually understand what we talk to them. What are we talking to them about? So again, customers who bought also bought. So we need to make sure that that's concise, that it goes straight to the point, that it's not strange to the user. If they would be like, "Yo, Andy, add it to cart," that might be a little bit on the, to me it would be actually pretty cool, but to some people it might not be. So we need to make sure that the copywriting element and the way that we communicate with the user in a written form is actually consistent with the expectation, I guess, right? With what they expect from the interface to be. So that's that. And that's what I would say. Structure and the content itself, right? What is the information and how do we communicate to the user? All the validation of your forms. Don't just write, there are errors on the form. Try and add more information that you've made a mistake, dear user, related to this format of information because the date that you've put in is not right. It should be in this form, in this format, right? So add additional information with your written text, but make sure that it's concise, straight to the point, structured properly, and is appropriate to the context of the app. So that's the copywriting, and that's the last element of this whole thing. So when it comes to UX design and how it differs from UI design, to me, UI design is a structural, integral part of UX design, and it needs to be there for the apps to look beautifully. But it all starts with the constraints, the creative constraints of the technology, so the resolution, etc. The information architecture, so we have a set of, a lot of information. We need to structure it in a proper way. We need to then think of ways how to design that information so that it's readable, the easiest to digest. Once we've done that, we want to make sure that the interaction with that information is as easy to understand, learnable, and consistent. Then once we have that, we can then test it out with a real human being to see if we've done the right job. Then we can go and move straight into beautiful colors, typography, banners, and all that greatness. And then, just making sure that it's all understandable in a written form as well, so that there are no lorem ipsum anywhere, that it's actually a tangible communication with the user as well. So these are the 7 elements that I would, name as being kind of a crucial part of UX design. And UI design is one element of those, right? It's very crucial to have a beautiful UI. And I've spent quite a few years as a UI designer. I still do UI myself, but I was, when I started off as a UI designer all these years back, I was missing these crucial aspects of how to structure that information, how to do it, and how to test it out with the users and make sure that my ideas are correct, how to connect that whole thing together, etc. So to me, that's pretty much the gist of this thing when it comes to designing user experiences online or offline for any experience that you want to have. So that's pretty much it. So now, if there are any questions, guys, I'm looking at the comments. I'm just gonna go into maybe this default scene over here, and also I'm gonna go and see if there's anything online that I should be worried about. Any questions? Okay, everything is operational. We are going for 1 hour and 20 minutes now, so quite a stretch, but not to worry. And there's just one little example that I wanted to show you, so I'm gonna go from this default scene into the screen. There you go. And let's go back to our little slide. So let's just see how we would apply this whole thing into this thing. So we have a lot of information, right? So it's like services, your great services, lab ideas, green therapy, and it's all lorem ipsum, right? So it's information. It's like, it's all the same. It lacks information architecture. So it lacks the structure of importance. And this is just information for one interface, for example, right? So what we would need to do is ask the people responsible for the services, ask some customers maybe, and see what's really important here, and then add some importance to these elements, right? This is just a simple example. Don't get too bogged down with it, but it's just to showcase what that UX design role is in practice. So we need to show what's important and what isn't, right? So we know that services, that's the header of the whole page, and then some subheaders, and then subheaders, and et cetera, right? So we already see some structure to that information just through the changing of the size of the fonts. And then usable typography, there should be some additional copywriting here, but this is kind of showcasing the 150% of line height. It already looks a little bit better, a little bit more readable. It's not just glued together. So I can actually now differentiate bulks of information, in between each other. So that's great. Then the lengths of those maybe were a little bit too long. So I, limited that element so that it's a little bit easier for us to read. And then I've structured it differently. So instead of having it in 2 separate columns, why don't we have it in 2 rows, for example, to make it more readable and move the header to the middle and to the very top, right? It's all left aligned now. So maybe if we just add some additional, visual information like an iconography somewhere there to add additional, characterization of that specific element. And then let's maybe do it, middle aligned, for example. And then we give it away to a visual designer to actually do some crazy design work, and that's what they do. So they come up with iconography, they choose different fonts, etc., etc. So for a very rough prototype, starting from this information, once we went through the process of prioritizing it, making sure that it's usable, interesting, what's important, what isn't, we can then give it to someone that does UI, and they have a different and a lot easier way to actually interact with this whole thing as well, because then now they can just worry about the visual aspect of this whole thing, and that's pretty much it.